Niska moves that the rules of the House be so far suspended so that House File Number 16 be recalled from the Committee on Elections, Finance, and Government Operations, be given its second and third readings, and be placed upon its final passage.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska, to your motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. We heard a lot of discussion about the Democrat-created immigration crisis that happened in our state, so we should take up House File 16 and solve the root cause of the problem, the lack of cooperation between our state and local law enforcement with federal immigration enforcement. Madam Speaker, I request a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing more than 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will defer to Representative Reimer, the chief author of House File 16, for further presentation.
I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative Reimer.
Madam Speaker and members, thank you for this opportunity to bring up with urgency House File 16. This bill accomplishes two main things. The first is that it mandates any illegal immigrant arrested on suspicion of a violent crime as defined by Minnesota Statute 624-172, Subdivision 5. And just want to pause for a moment to read some of what those crimes are, just as a refresher. Those crimes include murder, assault, domestic assault, crimes committed for the benefit of a gang, robbery, carjacking, kidnapping, and criminal sexual misconduct. It does a second thing. This bill prevents state and local government entities from actively prohibiting, restricting, or interfering with federal immigration authorities in carrying out federal immigration law. And I think we look back at Operation Metro Surge and we all feel lots of things about that. And we ask ourselves, what could we have done as a state? And despite everything that happened during Operation Metro Surge, you still see massive support for the need for local and federal immigration authorities to cooperate with one another. In fact, a few weeks ago, there was a poll from CARE 11 which showed about 85% of people in some form or fashion want the federal government and local law enforcement to work together to carry out immigration enforcement. You know, I heard a few weeks ago on this very floor that we need full cooperation between federal government and local law enforcement when it comes to investigations of the shootings that happened during Operation Metro Surge. I was relieved to hear from Chair Novotny that the BCA is working on that, but I was confused because we want cooperation between both bodies when it comes to investigations, but we don't want cooperation when it comes to law enforcement. So what this bill does is it creates a streamlined communication between everyone who needs to carry out immigration enforcement. You know, this legislation is modeled after the Lake and Riley Act, which was supported by Democrat Congresswoman Angie Craig. And I think that's worth pointing out because apart from this body, legislation like this has had bipartisan support. I look at Hennepin County Sheriff DeWanna Witt, who in an interview said, I don't see why we don't have policies that are uniform across 87 counties. This bill does that. So instead of having a hodgepodge of sanctuary or non-sanctuary policies, having sheriffs and city councils and county commissioners guessing at what's appropriate and what's not, my contention to you is that we create one Minnesota of law enforcement and communication and having all pertinent parties involved so we can prevent the chaos, we can prevent the confusion that we saw back in January. Members, I ask for your support today on House File 16. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Feist.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I rise to oppose this motion. This is not the bill that Minnesotans need in this moment of reckless, lawless behavior by the federal government in our streets. If anything like Operation Metro Surge had happened under a Democratic president, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would not be encouraging collaboration between police in Minnesota and the federal government. This bill would mean that Minnesota law enforcement would be doing ICE's job for them instead of responding to emergencies, investigating crime, and protecting victims. This is not what law enforcement wants. This is not what business owners want. And this is not what Minnesotans want. And I'd like to share a story of a friend of mine who is exercising his constitutional right to observe the activities of ICE. And he was chased dangerously in his car by ICE. He drove for protection to the Columbia Heights Police Department, where the ICE officers jumped out of their car and were banging on the windows of his car with their guns. And it just happened to be that a representative of the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension happened to just be in the parking lot. And he de-escalated the situation. And I just kind of asked my colleagues, what would cooperation have looked like in that situation? It was really important that our state law enforcement were able to intervene and were able to de-escalate. This bill does not make us safer. It doesn't get at the real and urgent priority of holding the Department of Homeland Security accountable and protecting our schools, our legal institutions, our healthcare facilities, and our homes from federal incursion onto our rights. This bill also undermines trust between community and law enforcement, and that is bad for all of us. As the County Attorneys Association wrote in their statement to the House on this bill, quote, "Local participation in federal immigration enforcement undermines public safety by deterring members of immigrant communities from reporting crimes and participating in the prosecution of those crimes due to fear of immigration consequences. ICE has made us less safe. They caused havoc in our streets. They broke doors down and detained people without identifying themselves. They crashed cars and they broke windows. Is this how we want Minnesota law enforcement officers to behave? This bill would double down on the economic devastation we've already experienced under Operation Metro Surge. We should instead be focused on the real priorities of Minnesotans. Instead, we are actively encouraging more damage to our economy and the daily needs of communities. Instead of scapegoating and fear-mongering about immigrants, we could be fixing healthcare. Immigrants energize our economy. Nearly 20% of construction workers are undocumented immigrants. Nearly 30% of direct care workers for long-term services are immigrants who care for our family members so that they can live in dignity in the later years of their lives. We know that people are afraid to engage in normal commerce because, for example, they may be violently arrested while working for or shopping at their local Target store. The cumulative impact of Operation Metro Surge on these immigrant workers and shoppers is massive. Our immigration laws are broken, and we should not spend our state and local tax dollars investing in them. The administration has made hundreds of thousands of legally present immigrants undocumented. They are interpreting law in contorted ways to detain as many people as possible, including children and a huge majority of people who have not committed any crimes. Human beings who have lived in our communities, oftentimes for decades, are being denied medication and warehoused in bleak conditions without access to adequate food, not to mention the lawyers that they are entitled to. Why should we invest state dollars in supporting this effort? So in conclusion, I just want to emphasize that this bill is a red herring intended to distract us from the real issues facing Minnesotans right now, a federal government that is violating our constitutional protections and undermining our economy. Let's get back to the work of meeting the moment. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Where to start? So the question was asked, or the hypothetical was put forward, if this were to have happened, Operation Metro Surge under a Democrat administration, all of us over on this side would be up in arms. Would it were true? Boy, would I love to live in a nation where a Democrat administration would take immigration enforcement seriously. We haven't seen that since Barack Obama, Bill Clinton. It's actually a pretty recent development that we don't have bipartisan agreement on the enforcement of immigration law. I won't go into speculating as to why that is. Suffice it to say, it is unquestionable that all of the alleged or actual negative externalities that came from Operation Metro Surge would not have happened were it for cooperation between local, state, and federal law enforcement. And the idea that federal law should not be enforced, this is like the one area of law, apparently, where we're saying that despite the fact that the law is on the books at the federal level, we're going to actively undermine and sabotage that law by failing to cooperate with it at the state and local level. That has created the chaos that you're complaining about. The last bill we heard, or the last motion we heard, to hand a crutch to people after their leg was broken, what this bill does is it keeps people's legs from being broken in the first place. It says we're going to have order in our streets. We're going to have order in our nation. We're going to enforce our laws. And if we have the type of cooperation that House File 16 provides, what you would see is significantly more targeted operations that don't have the wild externalities that have been cited. Because you would have Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Customs and Border Patrol, able to talk to the people on the ground who know their communities. Instead of having to go and ask somebody, some random person, have you seen someone who may or may not be an illegal alien, you could actually go to your local and state authorities and say, what are your top priorities? Who do we need to get out of your community in order to make it safe? You could have those sort of professional relationships, targeted actions, which would be a significantly lower threshold of resistance, operational resistance. It'd be easier to do the job. Why don't we want to make it easy to do the job? Now, the criticisms about Operation Metro Surge, the criticisms about how it was carried out, the philosophical approach that Kristi Noem took and that DHS took at the beginning, I think we can all recognize and acknowledge that things weren't done particularly well. That's why she's no longer there. That's why the Trump administration put Homan in. And what have we seen since then? By God, cooperation. And what's been the result? Relative calm in our streets, certainly compared to what came before. What else do you need to see in terms of evidence that this works? Vote green.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Perez-Vega.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will Representative Schwartz yield for a question?
Representative Schwartz will not yield. Representative Perez-Vega.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm a proud Latina from this district that I represent, from this district that I'm raising an amazing, beautiful little girl who is in our public school systems. I have pride in that. I have pride in the capital city of St. Paul that is a sanctuary city. I have pride in the community that raised me to also, I have the honor of being elected here in my second term, of the history and the legacies of not only Latino immigrants, but of all immigrants on this indigenous Dakota land. I have pride in the District of 65B in what I have seen of not only community and constituents coming together to feed every Minnesotan, coming together to find resources so that every human being has a roof over their head, because housing is a human right, and that our local law enforcement have been a part of ensuring that the law is being enforced with justification and not what we have witnessed and have had to continue to survive in what folks think is post-operational Metro Surge. There's been violence. There hasn't been laws that are enforced to an extentity of peaceful matters. And this isn't what's just coming from legal observers. This isn't what's just coming from the PTA parents who volunteer to make sure that all of our communities are safe during school hours. This is not a philosophical Disney world of what our children are living in. It is a nightmare on Cesar Chavez Street. It is a nightmare on Arcade and Payne. It is a nightmare on Lake Street, and it is a nightmare in the main streets of St. Cloud to Wilmer to all of those mains in greater Minnesota that I have visited as a little girl to now with my little girl touring this amazing, great indigenous land of Minnesota. I'm a lawmaker. I'm proud of that. And in this chamber, we've been able to create law to ensure that there is public safety based off of research, based off of collaborative efforts, and based off of dignity for humanity. When you have law enforcement from all over the state, when you have superintendents from all over the state, when you have educators, health practitioners, in these past 2 weeks, we have heard not only in our state's experiences, but throughout the nation, who has came into these chambers to be supportive of protecting law, of abiding law, but not by enforcing unjust violence. I'm proud of being a first-generation Boricua born here. Second-generation citizen to third-generation of my grandparents who were not citizens until the Jones Act of 1917. That opened up the doors for the highest military recruitment in all of the United States history out of Puerto Rico. I find solidarity with people who want to not recognize that human beings, we bleed the same, we breathe the same, we have the senses, we're born the same. And it's not, we only have one life to live. We're living life every day. We only have one day that we die. And there has been law enforcement of federal agents killing people, kidnapping people who are waiting to be naturalized, who provide so that we could be in this very area to be good Minnesotans. I don't know what news or what you're watching or what social media, whatever platform you're on, but if my 6-year-old knows what's right and what's wrong, that what's wrong is when these folks are masked up and coming and grabbing people out of our mercados, that what is wrong is that me as a mom who is a citizen, born at Methodist Hospital in St. Louis Park, have to walk down in the same barrio I came as a day old with my passport and my daughter's birth certificate because we get questioned. Where's the safety in that? It's common sense, man. This is absolutely ridiculous.
I recognize a member from Chisago, Representative Reimer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members, for this opportunity to bring an urgency forward on House File 16. I want to know that, I want you all to know that I hear you. I echo what Representative Hudson said, that I don't think any one of us would defend every tactic that was used during Operation Metro Surge. My heart for this bill is that we do create a streamlined process between all local and federal immigration authorities who can handle these crimes and who can handle this situation that we found ourselves in. And I brought it up last year, and I think it's worth bringing up again, and that is the name of America Thayer. And I won't forget her name, and I hope you won't either. And America Thayer was brutally murdered and beheaded by a Cuban illegal immigrant with multiple convictions and awaiting felony conviction in Shakopee. And this bill, I will say again, this bill would have caught that person early, would have facilitated communication between all local law enforcement and federal immigration authority much earlier to catch that person, and America Thayer would still be alive today. I think about her, I think about her son, I think about her grandkids, and this bill keeps us safer because it coordinates all people involved who need to be part of this process. Members, I ask that you vote green, and if you vote red, I ask that you will go back to your communities and say, thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This bill is a total distraction. We heard that the reason that federal agents came to our state was that our local law enforcement was not cooperating. But to blame our local law enforcement for what has happened is totally offensive. The federal government assaulted our communities not because of any actions of local law enforcement. The stated reason was fraud. They said that our neighbors were garbage. They went after our community members. And then members of this body invited fraudster Nick Shirley to come do a video, and that caught the president's attention. And lo and behold, within the next week, Operation Metro Surge was in our communities. Immigration enforcement is the job of the federal government. And over 80% of those who've been arrested in Operation Metro Surge and other recent law enforcement actions have not had a criminal record. So this is not a local law enforcement issue. And in fact, Tom Homan himself said that he didn't want local law enforcement to be immigration officers. So what are we talking about? We are trying to pretend that there is a cooperation problem, but if you listen to Tom Homan himself, when he announced the end of Operation Metro Surge, he said 3 times that there is unprecedented cooperation between the federal government and local law enforcement. So by the federal government's own statements, there is no problem here. There is unprecedented cooperation that we are seeing between the federal government and local law enforcement. This is a non-issue. What it is an attempt to distract from the harm that has been done to our communities through an incredibly unpopular, and I'm glad that at least a couple colleagues admitted, deeply flawed, we would go further and say dangerous and harmful actions that have happened in our community, abuses that we've seen across our state. We cannot blame local law enforcement for this. The blame is squarely on the federal government. I ask for a no vote.
I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Thank you, Representative Reimer, for this bill. House File 16 is just about restoring basic cooperation between state, local, and federal law enforcement. As has been discussed, much of the chaos we've seen in Minnesota has been the direct result of policies that intentionally block that cooperation. Our own Attorney General issued opinions that effectively nullify federal law enforcement partnerships. One opinion blocked the use of 287G agreements, the gold standard for federal-state cooperation on immigration enforcement. Another provided legal cover for sheriffs to ignore ICE detainers, and the results have been stark. In Hennepin County, the sheriff's office complied with only 8% of ICE detainers over a 2-year period. Ramsey County complied with only 6%. What that means is that when jails refuse to honor detainers, immigration enforcement has to move outside of the safety of a jail, out into our streets. When officers are forced to track that person down in a home, a neighborhood, or a workplace, the risk to both officers and to everyone involved increases dramatically. House File 16 would encourage arresting people in the controlled environment of a jail. And when we're talking about who we're talking about are criminals who are here illegally. Minnesotans overwhelmingly support that type of cooperation and overwhelmingly oppose the obstruction we are seeing from some Democrat-run cities and counties. Minnesotans believe local law enforcement should cooperate with federal immigration authorities to deport those who are in the country illegally, and that's exactly what House File 16 provides. It requires that when someone is in the country illegally and they're arrested on suspicion of a violent crime, that information is reported to federal immigration authorities. If you're for that common sense level of cooperation, the vote is real simple. Vote for this motion so we can pass House File 16. If you vote no, what you're doing is saying to local and state law enforcement leaders, Democrats who want to obstruct federal law enforcement, to keep doing what they're doing. That's the vote that's before us. Members, cooperation between law enforcement agencies should be the default because enforcing the law should be the default. Federal law, state law, local law. If we're for the rule of law, we're for enforcing the law. House File 16 restores that principle and aligns Minnesota law with what the overwhelming majority of Minnesotans are asking for. A green vote is a vote for law enforcement cooperation. A no vote is a vote against common sense local law enforcement helping to deport criminal illegal aliens. It's that simple. Vote yes.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members participating remotely.
Baker.
Baker votes aye.
Baker votes aye. Acom.
Go ahead.
Acom votes no.
Acom votes no. Carroll.
What's that?
Carroll.
No.
Carroll votes no. Fogelman.
Fogelman votes yes.
Fogelman votes aye. Frederick.
Frederick votes no.
Frederick votes no. Gilman.
Gilman votes aye.
Gilman votes aye. Hicks.
Hicks votes no.
Hicks votes no. Jones.
Jones votes no.
Jones votes no. Keeler.
Keeler votes no.
Keeler votes no. Kosnick.
Kosnick, aye.
Kosnick votes aye. Kreshaw.
Kresha votes aye.
Kreshaw votes aye. Lee F.
Lee F, no.
Lee F, no. Liebling.
Liebling votes no.
Liebling votes no. McDonald.
McDonald votes aye.
McDonald votes aye. Purcell.
Purcell no.
Purcell votes no. Quam.
Go ahead.
Aye.
Quam votes aye. Rarick.
Burke votes aye.
Rarick votes aye. Ryer.
Ryer votes no.
Ryer votes no. Smith.
Smith votes no.
Smith votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 ayes and 67 nays, the motion does not prevail.